I was 34 years old that summer, and this happened in 2004. I wasn't reckless, just determined. That June, after a year working in the city and growing more restless by the day, I packed my old canvas rucksack and took off alone for the Five Ponds wilderness area. I'd hiked and fished its riverbeds in my youth, but had never truly gone deep, never past the Sand Lake lean-tos or the Cold River forks. This time, I aimed to go farther. I chose a remote tract near Wolf Pond, between high ridges and veiled by miles of thick spruce and boggy understory. It was 20 miles from the nearest trailhead at Bear Pond Road. I carried my gear in a 40-liter frame pack, including a small solo tent, a compact wood stove I rarely used, and enough food for 3 nights. The weather was good dry, cool in the evenings, and I made the hike over 2 days, stopping to fish and soak in the isolation. By the second evening, I reached a flat rise above the southern edge of Wolf Pond, about a quarter mile off the old logging trail. There, I set up camp under a stand of balsams that opened just enough to offer a sliver of sky. I made a small fire ring, cooked rice, and pan-fried brook trout, and watched the stars climb over the ridgeline. I crawled into my tent around 10 p.m., belly full and mind at ease. I remember thinking how alive I felt, like something had been missing for years, and now I'd finally remembered what it was. That peace didn't last. I woke up to the sound of wood cracking, not a branch falling. No, this was sharp, deliberate. It was just after 1 a.m., and the woods were utterly dark beyond the tent. The sound came in intervals, slow and forceful, like someone smashing 2 logs together over and over again. I froze, breath shallow. I listened, trying to reason it away. Maybe a deer had stepped on something, or a tree was creaking in the wind. But there was no rustling leaves, just those brutal, steady cracks through the forest. Then it stopped. I waited, my every sense wide open. Minutes passed. Then silence. Like dead silence. I sat up, slowly unzipped the tent, and peeked outside. I didn't want to, but I needed to. My flashlight beam swept across the clearing trees. Shadows, nothing else. I stepped out barefoot and made my way to a nearby clearing where I figured any latecomer might have set up a camp. But there was nothing. That's when I heard again, footsteps. Heavy, coming from the thick pines about 40 feet ahead. And they were bipedal. Thump, thump, crunch. I froze. My light was still on, shaking in my hand. I've spent enough time in the woods to know the difference between a rotting carcass and the stench of something alive. This was different, like wet fur, decay, and something sour beneath it all. My stomach turned. Then a rock shot out of the woods and struck me in the shoulder. Hard. It was the size of a grapefruit, and it hurt. I dropped to one knee from the shock of it. Seconds later, another smaller but faster slammed into my leg, right above the knee. I knew this wasn't some animal bluffing or wandering into my sight. Something was targeting me. And then, it stepped out of the trees. And what I saw nearly made my legs give out. It was tall, massive, 8 feet, maybe more. Its body was covered in dark, matted hair, black with streaks of earthy brown. The light caught a face that didn't make sense. It was long, with a pronounced brow and wide mouth. The eyes were the worst part, huge, black, and wet-looking. Almost too large for its face. It just stood there, staring. Then its mouth opened wide, impossibly wide, and it let out a roar that nearly dropped me. It was a shriek and a growl in one. My ears rang, my vision blurred. That broke the spell. I turned and ran, not into the woods. I knew that was suicide. I ran toward my tent, the only cover I had, praying it wouldn't follow me in that instant. I dove in, zipped it shut with shaking hands, scrambled under my sleeping bag, and fumbled for the pocket knife I kept in my side pouch. It was all I had. The silence, returned. At some point, around 3 or 4 a.m., I heard footsteps again, slow and dragging. Something large passed just outside the tent. I couldn't tell if it was the same creature or something else, but nothing disturbed the tent. I tore down my camp in minutes. I slung the pack over one shoulder and sprinted the mile back to the logging trail. Once I hit the path, I ran, and I mean ran the full 20 miles back to the trailhead. My body wasn't built for that kind of exertion. I made it in under 4 hours, soaked in sweat, legs cramping, chest burning, but I never stopped. I reached my car and didn't stop driving until I crossed into Tupper Lake. I swear I never went back to that part of the Adirondack since. I still love the woods, but I see them differently now. Not as a peaceful escape, but as an ancient place full of secrets. There's a kind of quiet you only get in the mountains. That's what I loved about living at the edge of the High Peaks region in the Adirondacks. My husband, James, and I moved there after our wedding, seeking something calmer. I was 21 and still learning what it meant to be still with myself. We had a little cottage, nothing extravagant, perched on a hill above a winding trail that dipped into the woods behind our property. In the summers, we'd hike every weekend, but it was winter when I loved the mountains best, when everything was dusted with snow. It was on one of those quiet winter mornings, mid-December, just after a fresh snowfall, that everything changed. We'd gotten up early that Saturday, bundled ourselves into layers, and set off for our usual loop through the trail that wrapped around the base of Nonmark Mountain. The snow was still soft, powdery. James walked ahead, clearing the way with his boots, his breath curling out in thick white puffs. I remember thinking how grateful I was for mornings like that, when the world felt untouched, like we were the only people alive. But no, we saw something strange there. I thought it was a pile of clothes or maybe someone's dropped pack, but as we got closer, the shape took form. A man face down in the snow, arms stiff at his sides, legs bent awkwardly, like he'd just collapsed mid-step. My heart jumped, and I rushed ahead, calling out. James reached him first and knelt down, but before he could even touch the man's shoulder, the figure jerked upright with such speed and violence it made me flinch. He stood too straight, too suddenly, like a puppet pulled by strings. He wore a black overcoat, fine and tailored, and underneath it a full suit. No hat, no gloves. His shoes were polished, soaked through with snow. He looked wildly out of place, and his eyes, when they locked on me, were wide with something I couldn't name. Not fear, not madness. Something worse. You shouldn't be here, he said, and he kept glancing over his shoulder, as if someone else might appear from the trees. You shouldn't be here. James held up a hand. Sir, are you hurt? Do you need help? The man didn't answer. He took 2 unsteady steps backward, muttering something under his breath, eyes flicking from me to the trail behind us. Then, suddenly, he turned and bolted into the woods. Oh my God. We stood there, stunned. James shouted after him, started to follow, but I grabbed his arm. No, I said, let him go. We called the ranger station as soon as we got home. They sent someone out, asked the usual questions, noted the location, and said they'd put together a small search. A few hours later, we heard the snowmobiles starting up from a mile off. That night, I lay awake in bed, the image of the man burned into my mind. It was after midnight when the knocking started. I shot up in bed. James was already halfway down the stairs before I could stop him. The knocking wasn't loud. It was rapid, frantic. We opened the door. I swear it was him. Same man, same black coat. Except this time, he looked worse. His face was pale, almost gray, and blood had dried along his jaw. You have to leave, he rasped. Both of you. You don't understand. They'll come. Who? James asked. Who's coming? But the man was already backing away. And with that, He ran again into the forest behind our house. We called the police this time. When they came, they found nothing but the man's coat, snagged on a tree limb about 50 yards from our property line. It was torn in several places, like it had been dragged through briars. Inside the pocket, they found a matchbook, but no ID, no wallet, no phone. They told us they'd keep looking, but as the days passed, it became clear they weren't going to find him. The man was never found. It's been 4 years now. Time moves on, but those nights still feel like a real threat, like something just waiting to return. Nothing like it ever happened again. We never saw that man again. And honestly, I still have no idea what he meant when he told us we should leave this place. Maybe he was just some psycho or strung out on something. Either way, I hope to never find out. It started like one of our many adventures. We were both nature lovers, hikers, the kind of couple that found peace in places most people feared for their silence. Our plan was a 3-day backwoods trek through a less traveled region of the Adirondacks near Lake George. Her uncle lived nearby and agreed to drive us to the trailhead. That was the last time I saw him. She planned every detail. That was her thing. She mapped out the trail, scouted weather forecasts, even logged possible emergency routes. I remember thinking how lucky I was to be with someone who could find joy in such order, and how safe I felt, letting her take the lead. Her uncle dropped us off about 15 minutes from town. He told us not to worry about the crowds in Lake George, said we were headed where tourists never tread. The first day was everything it should have been. Cool air, scattered sunlight through the trees, the soft hush of wind moving the canopy above. We hiked until late afternoon and set up camp at a clearing deep in the woods. It was beautiful, too beautiful. That night, something kept me awake. I'm an anxious sleeper at the best of times, but this was different. It was like someone was pacing outside the tent. Not heavy steps, just movement. Constant, erratic. The kind you catch out of the corner of your mind, never quite sure if it's real. I unzipped the flap twice to check. Each time, nothing. Just darkness. The next day we climbed. By noon, we stood on the edge of a massive ridge, looking out at miles of untouched forest. Mountains in the distance, rolling and endless. It was breathtaking. We made camp near that ridge around 7 p.m. Still light out. Then out of nowhere, 3 of them. 2 men and 1 woman. I didn't hear them approach. The first man spoke. "Hey there, friends," he said, like we'd known each other. They didn't do anything threatening. That was the worst part. They just existed. Casually, intrusively, wandering into our campsite like they belonged there. The man kept talking, but it was all nonsense. Complimented our gear, said something about our tents being good stuff. The 2 men had long, tangled dreadlocks. They wore tattered tie-dye shirts that didn't match the cold around us. The woman just stared, scowling, rigid. Her buzzed head and a massive bird tattoo that stretched from her throat down her chest made her look almost statuesque. I tried to play it cool. "Hey, can I help you with something?" No response. They just moved through our space, quietly inspecting our things without touching them. Eventually, I said we were turning in for the night and hoped they'd take the hint. They didn't. The dreadlock man just laughed, like someone who didn't understand humor but tried to mimic it. Then he said something like, "It's been a long time." What did that mean? They left after that. Just turned around and vanished. We didn't sleep. I held her close while we listened to the wind, or what we hoped was the wind. But then, around midnight, it started again. Laughter. That same broken, screeching laughter. Closer this time. Louder. She stirred. I motioned for her to stay silent. Then a voice, just outside the tent. "Hello, again, friends." My blood ran cold. "You know," we were thinking, he drawled, "you were kinda rude earlier." Then he whistled. Loud. A tuneless, violent sound. "I just wanted to see your tent, man. Why don't you come on out?" The woman began laughing, sharp and jarring. We began packing. Quietly, my heart was hammering, but I stayed focused. I looked at her and mouthed, "If they come in, we run." They didn't unzip the tent at first. Instead, they jumped on it, threw themselves against the sides like wild animals. The whole structure rocked as they shouted incoherently and kept laughing. I don't know what they were saying. My mind was too loud to hear. Then I saw the zipper start to move. She bolted. I followed, nearly tripping on the flap. As I crawled through, I felt hands on my backpack. One of them had me. I kicked, twisted, broke free and ran. I turned back once, just once, and saw him holding my pack in one hand. In the other, something else. I couldn't tell what. A knife? A flashlight? We ran. I don't remember how long we ran. We made it back to town just after dawn. We were covered in dirt, scratched up, trembling. We called the police. Called her uncle too. We gave our statements. But there was no follow-up. Oh, God. No arrests. No investigation. But the worst part, we never saw her uncle again either. She told me later she couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, he had something to do with it. I told her she was being paranoid. But truthfully, I've thought the same thing 100 times. How did they find us? That wasn't a random trail. It was remote. No one would just stumble across that spot, unless they were led. It's been 4 years. I've never gone back. I don't hike anymore. It was the second week of July, 2021. We were a dozen boys in that summer camp, and we were deep in the Blue Ridge wilderness of the Adirondack Mountains. That night was rope burn, a long-standing tradition at Alder Branch. Each cabin had to build a fire high and hot enough to burn through a thick rope suspended between 2 posts. Bragging rights were everything. Winning meant your cabin got the best dessert for the week. Our counselor, Thayer, was in his early 20s. He had one of those intense stares that made you sit up a little straighter without meaning to. We followed him into the woods that evening like soldiers behind a captain, our arms loaded with burlap sacks for kindling. We'd been sent to gather wood from beyond the outer trail, a path not marked on the map but known to the older campers. Past the low ridge behind the mess hall, that's where the driest wood was, Thayer told us. And we believed him. There were 5 of us, and in that Bran was the tallest, always the first to volunteer for anything dumb. Milo was scared of everything but tried hard not to show it. We split up, fanning out under the boughs of fir and spruce. I was maybe 20 yards from the others when I smelled it. I thought it was a dead animal, maybe a raccoon or porcupine that had curled up and rotted beneath a log. But this was worse. It hit the back of my throat and made my stomach lurch. Wet, metallic, and thick. I turned my head, trying to figure out where it was strongest, and that's when I saw Bran standing completely still, one hand half raised. "Corwin," he said. "Just my name." He didn't move.
I walked toward him.
And there it was, slumped at the base of a birch tree, half hidden by tall ferns and the tangle of mountain laurel, was a body. I couldn't even tell it was human. The skin had gone the color of tree bark, sunken and stretched over the shape beneath. The face was turned slightly toward us, lips parted, eyes sunken deep like hollow coins. The smell was everywhere now, sickly sweet and sour. Flies swarmed in clouds. One arm rested across the chest, stiff and discolored. The legs sprawled out awkwardly. I stepped back instinctively, bumping into a branch that scratched across my neck. Bran didn't move. His mouth hung open, and I could see a thread of drool on his bottom lip. Thayer appeared behind us a minute later. I didn't even hear him coming. "What the hell are you two doing?" he began, then stopped. I turned to watch his face change. His eyes hardened. He dropped the kindling sack and immediately pulled the walkie-talkie from his belt. "This is Thayer," he said into it, voice clipped. "We need the director. Now. South Ridge past Outer Trail. Emergency. Do not bring campers." He turned to us. "Go back. Don't say a word." We stood frozen. "Now," he said more forcefully. We obeyed. Back at the fire circle, the others were already stacking their wood, trying to spark tinder with flint. The whole competition felt like a dream after what we'd seen. About 20 minutes later, I noticed a few staffers moving through the trees in the distance. Not counselors. Older men. One wore a ranger's hat. Another had a blue jacket with gold lettering on the back that read Essex County Search and Rescue. The rest of the camp was never officially told. That night, Thayer gathered our cabin for a reflection circle. He lit a small candle and told us, in his measured tone, that something unfortunate had been found in the woods, an individual who had been deceased for some time. He didn't use the word body. He said it was important not to speculate, not to spread fear. Camp should feel safe, he told us. And it is. What happened out there has nothing to do with you. But it did. It had everything to do with us. I couldn't sleep that night. I wondered what his name had been, who had missed him. The counselors tried to act normal, but some of them were clearly rattled. One night, I overheard two of them talking behind the arts cabin. They said the man was probably in his 30s. No ID. No car found. His shoes were hiking boots, worn out. They thought it might have been a suicide. I wondered what kind of sadness leads someone to walk deep into the forest and choose never to walk out. Something about summer camp had changed for me. Honestly, that was my last summer at camp.